This is David Bernstein. Welcome to this edition of the SpeechCast, a joint venture between the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values and the Speech Project of the Jewish Journal. With us today, I'm very happy to have Sasha White. Sasha works at an organization called Plebity, which is a free speech organization that she'll tell you more about. She also was an assistant literary agent where she experienced some challenges regarding her views, and you could argue, and she will talk about this, was canceled. And so Sasha, I'm really happy that you joined us for today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. Glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about what you were doing, and then we'll talk about what you're doing now. But what you were doing, you were assistant literary agent. What happened?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So I was an assistant literary agent very briefly last summer, 2020, and it was my first sort of career, real job out of college. And about a month into the job, I was fired when an anonymous Twitter user tagged my boss in a tweet saying that I am a vile transphobic bigot. And within about 2 hours of this tweet being posted, my boss fired me over email. It was a Sunday night. And that was it. So if you want, I can get into sort of what I said or what I tweeted, but that was the bare bones of the story.
So yes, so let's get into that a little bit. What did you say? What did you tweet?
Yeah, so I was quite interested in that time, at that time in feminism. I no longer call myself a feminist, but I was looking at what was happening with the transgender movement and gender identity ideology, which so I was tweeting about these things, and I was tweeting things like, pronouns are, I was tweeting critiques about pronouns, they, them pronouns, that I thought that was pointless and unhelpful for feminism or for any kind of a discussion. And I had a personal Twitter account where I talked about these issues, and that was under my real name, real picture, but it wasn't affiliated with my job. And then my professional account was separate. I had my job on there and was kept it very business-like. But because of my personal account was what was tagged by this Twitter user, sort of showing it to my boss, that was what got me fired. And the tweets that my boss cited were things like, I had retweeted, someone said, there is no spectrum of people who can be forcibly impregnated. So things that are really just basic facts about human biology, but are things that are being denied by the gender identity ideology. Those were the type of things I was tweeting. And, I wasn't targeting any people or anything like that, but that was, those were the things that I was talking about.
And so now you're working, I think, with your father in this new organization called Plebity. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so after I got fired, I decided that I needed to come on and explain myself and explain where I was coming from, and that I'm not a bigot. I just want to state facts. And so I did these interviews online. I have a YouTube channel, and on our site, we post interviews, long form interviews. And then we developed this idea of doing something called the Free Speech Fund, where we have a community funded fund that we give grants to people who are punished for their speech in some material way, whether they're fired or in some other way severely punished for their speech or subject to some kind of a hostile environment based on their beliefs. So we've given a few grants so far, and it's a really exciting project that we're doing to try to, in general, just show people that there is support out there for those of you who want to speak the truth that's not currently acceptable in the political climate. And we want to show people that there will be some support for that.
So can I ask you what your personal politics are?
Yeah, absolutely. I really consider myself a true independent, as much as I think as a person can be. Obviously, no man is an island, but I don't align myself with any political party nor an ideology at the moment. I've even decided, I'm not a feminist anymore because, for one thing, I don't want to have to adhere to an ideology where you have to sort of take the package. I would rather make up my mind on each individual thing. And also, I started to see some things within feminism that I kind of thought were mirroring some of the ideological elements from the woke or identitarianism side as well. So politically, I was sort of my whole life a leftist. now I'm not so proud to be associated with the left. And so I would say maybe I'm politically homeless.
Yeah, well, join the politically homeless club.
Yeah.
Um, so so how would you describe this current ideological moment we're in that led to you getting fired from one of your first jobs for tweeting something in a private account? But broaden that a little bit and tell us what you think it is happening.
Yeah, well, I think that there is this scary movement, a censorious authoritarian movement. It's science denialism, it's truth denialism. I think that it is something of a form of social control where people have to identify themselves with a group, but they also have to denounce their privileges and not consider themselves as just individuals or as members of a socioeconomic class. I really think that it might be more useful to analyze things from a class perspective. But the identity politics, where the most important things about you are your race, your gender, things like that. Maybe it's an intentional distraction to keep us from actually doing the real work of politics, which has nothing to do with how you choose to live your life or what your skin color is.
Yes. So you're Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit, like, where are you from, by the way? You got to ask where you're from. Where are
Sure.
you from?
Yeah, I'm from California. I'm from Berkeley, California, and I am Jewish, but I'm not religious. I'm a secular Jew, and I don't believe in God, but I'm not sure if I'm an atheist or an agnostic. And but being Jewish is really important to me. I'm really proud to be Jewish, and for me, being Jewish has to do with the history and the culture.
So one of the things my organization, the Jewish Institute for Liberal Values, is trying to do is advance this idea of liberalism and, of course, also oppose critical social justice ideology, the imposition of it within the Jewish community. And we're thinking through these issues as they're coming up. One of the issues that's come up recently, and I'd love to get your take on it, is whether or not critical race theory should be banned from K through 12 schools. It's come up in several states. There's a bill in Idaho. There are other bills. I think the governor of Florida, DeSantis, issued an executive order banning it. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm not sure whether it should be banned in schools. I'm very much pro free speech, but I do think that critical race theory is a form of racism. And I think it's, some of the things that they say are like, a non-racist is a racist in denial. That's an Ibram X. Kendi phrase. Mm-hmm. And that's quite disturbing because that means you can't really opt out of this. You have to say, I am a racist. I mean, it's also a Kafka trap where if you deny your guilt, that shows your guilt.
Right.
So I find it very, very troubling. And I don't like that they're teaching children that those differences are the most important thing about them. I mean, you have Robin DiAngelo, who stands up there and says, it took me years to get people to notice my whiteness and its significance. So and I think also what that means is that she'll have a job for life, as has been pointed out by other people, that by perpetuating this stuff, they're perpetuating their fields of consultancy or academia or whatever it is. So I don't think, I kind of do think we should go back to a little bit of colorblindness would be better than this. And I don't think that kids should be told that based on your group identity, you're evil or you're a victim or you're an oppressor.
Right. So can it be, I guess the question I have and I've been struggling with, can critical race theory be taught as one of other lenses through which one might look at disparities in the world and social problems? Or is it by its very nature the kind of ideology that demands to be looked at in as a singular explanation of the world?
That's a great question. It might be the former. I think that critical race theory did come out of law schools. Mm-hmm. So perhaps it's applicable there, and maybe that's completely fine. I think that it would be fine if it was the former, if it was one way of looking at the world and the systems. I mean, we do have racism. We had slavery. We have a legacy of that. We still have discrimination. And while I think policies should actually just target people based on their socioeconomic level, I think we should just help poor people rather than by race. But yeah, there is a place to look at those things, certainly. So it might have a place. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. So you're now working with Plebity to help advance the idea of free speech. What do you think the game plan ought to be for organizations like ours who are trying to advance the value of freedom of expression of ideas? How do we change society and institutions to allow for that dialogue?
Well, I think we have to be careful not to fall into the trap of saying that I will protect my speech, but not yours. So we do have to protect the speech of people we don't agree with. And we have to be principled about that, because otherwise you're just no better than any ideologue. And I was thinking a lot in the beginning when I got canceled that the left needs to reclaim free speech as a value, because more traditionally it was a leftist value and it was seen as something where you could use to challenge the status quo. And from a minority or marginalized perspective, you need free speech to gain your rights, which is still true. I'm not sure the left can do that now. I think the left has really been, gutted. And so as for how we change society, I don't want to give an answer. I don't want to give a solution because I don't know. But I know for us at Plebity, we are talking to people we don't agree with. We're, holding these dialogues and exchanges and just trying to bring back, I guess, reasoned conversation.
Right. And how do we model that? That's the challenge. How can we show that one can be both sensitive and thoughtful about racial disparities, about the legacy of racism in this country, and at the same time open to alternative interpretations of why we are where we are? Mm-hmm. So you got into this because of sort of the issue around trans rights and identity and so forth. Have you thought more deeply about that issue in particular and how we might navigate those very fraught discussions?
Yeah, I think for one thing, we have to be honest, even though it can feel mean. We have to be honest. I mean, I think it's a situation of like the emperor is wearing no clothes. We can't pretend like the emperor is clothed, aka we can't pretend that people can change sex. It really comes down to that, because gender identity ideology is pushing this idea that what makes you a man or a woman is a deep internal feeling, aka your gender identity. And there's many reasons why that's regressive or hurtful to certain people, but ultimately is just untrue. It's just anti-scientific. What makes you a man or a woman is your biology. And that matters for so many reasons. So when we have this discussion, it's what the other side needs to realize is that this isn't transphobia. This isn't against trans people. This is against this ideology, because this ideology is now hurting children who are being transitioned medically under the age of 18. So, and many of them regret it. So, I mean, yes, I come at this from a very, very strong perspective. So I'm telling the other side they need to stop calling us bigots and listen to us. But my side from this perspective needs to stop self-marginalizing. They need to start talking to other people. They need to stop being obsessed with ideological purity, where it's a lot of radical feminists who want to push their ideology as well. And I think they need to realize we need to work with all kinds of people and not be closed-minded from any perspective.
So let me play this out a little bit, because I've been having conversations and podcasts with trans folks, recently with Buck Angel, who's an amazing person. Our friend Xander Keeg, who's also an amazing trans man thinker and very involved in this work. What they would, of course, they would all agree that that sex is binary, that you're born a man or a woman, but that gender is at least partially socially constructed. I mean, I'm using my words, not their words, that gender is at least partially socially constructed. So there's this notion of gender roles in our society. Maybe some of that is dictated through, evolution, but some of that is also socially constructed, and it exists differently in different places. And a truck doesn't have to be male, and a doll doesn't have to be female, and so forth. And people are socialized into these gender roles. And if they wish to change their anatomical makeup, and if they wish to identify as a male or female, the rest of society should respect that. How would you? And so this is sort of a third way view. It's not in denial of the idea that there are people who have deep-seated feelings about wanting to be the opposite sex or gender, but it's also but it doesn't say that you can change your sex. How do you feel about that perspective?
Well, I completely agree that adults should be let to live how they want. I have no problem with it. I'm quite happy for people to be non-conforming to their sex roles. I think that's great. I don't think that society should recognize it in all cases. I think we should recognize people's identities in some cases. I'm really happy to use the word trans woman, the word trans man, because that makes sense. That's respectful, and it refers to people how they want to be referred to. But when you start having society recognize it, you run into some serious problems. For one thing, right now, we have men being transferred to women's prisons. This is an ongoing story that I think people are going to start hearing a lot about more in the mainstream soon. In Washington State, there have been convicted rapists transferred from men's prisons to women's prisons because they requested to, because they identify as a woman. One of them was convicted of raping a 12-year-old girl. One of them was convicted of serially murdering prostitutes. And now there are allegations that in the female prison, they've committed sexual assault. This is just one example where we shouldn't be recognizing these identities as more important than sex. And there are a lot of examples like that. I really applaud trans people like Buck Angel. I don't know the other person you mentioned, but they're speaking the truth. I've learned so much from trans people like Buck Angel, who makes this really great point that he's never had to state so many times that he's biologically female until this whole movement came around, because it's the people who are pushing the sex denialism that are really getting in his way at this point, where he has to continue to reiterate, I am not a male. I am biologically female. That is why I'm trans. That is why I had to transition. Stop making me bring up my history. So yeah.
Interesting. So what do you, I want to go back to the question that you sort of didn't want to go too deeply into. You're having conversations, but I'm still struggling and I need advice, and you're a smart person, and you're also a young person, by the way. I mean, I'm not going to speculate on your age, but I don't think, you're way up there like me. And I guess the question is, like, what do we do to get younger people, college age, post-college age, to think more deeply about these issues? I mean, I'm not sure, by the way. I mean, I have a 24-year-old son. I have a 16-year-old son. I have two stepkids that are in their late teens, that this is such as widely held set of perspectives as sometimes people think, that there are people who pay homage to it, but that really don't believe it, that sort of falsify their preferences publicly when they're asked about it, but in private, they may have some misgivings. So I think that's the case with people in their 20s as well. But what is your view on that? How widespread do you think? I mean, you're in Berkeley also. Did you go to Berkeley?
I am currently not in Berkeley. I'm still in the Bay Area. But I spent the last 7 years of my life living in New York. So I was completely surrounded by this. I went to college in New York. So I think that people my age need to be brave. They need to get some chutzpah. And there is this preference falsification, but the thing is that we still don't live in a regime where you will be shipped off to prison for your beliefs. You will be fired, quite likely. But some people are going to have to pay that price. And as much as I've never advocated for anyone to put themselves in harm's way, I've always said, protect yourself first, protect your identity, protect your job. But at the same time, that's why we've created the free speech fund, because we want people who do put themselves on the line to get some support. And we we exist to give grants to people who get fired for their speech or something like that. So what can I say to people my age? I have a podcast that I do with another young woman named MK Fain, who's a writer and programmer. And we specifically talk about these gender issues in a way that's geared toward young people our age and younger, or whatever age. We have viewers of all ages. But we talk about that a lot, and we talk about the intense social pressure right now to conform to these beliefs in certain circles. And what we've talked about really is like how freeing it is when you speak the truth. You will lose friends maybe, but the friends that you gain will be better because they won't cancel you. Like her and I will disagree on stuff, and it comforts us. It makes us trust each other because we know that we won't cancel each other for our views.
And you're being authentic.
Yeah.
It's your authentic self.
Exactly.
Talking to somebody else's authentic self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But how prevalent do you think it is among, let's say, college students that, and especially, look, I'm sure it's more prevalent in the New York or Berkeley area than it would be in a lot of other parts of the country. But how prevalent do you think it actually is? Not just the people who profess to believe in these perspectives.
So like, you mean like how many people might be secretly thinking?
Yeah, I mean, what is, do you hear among your friends, people saying, yeah, that's a little too much. Yeah, I think that's a little radical. I don't really believe that, but maybe in a public setting, they might have to nod their head.
Yes, I can tell you, I've had so many conversations with young women where one of us will say one thing contrary to trans ideology, and then the other will breathe a sigh of relief. Like, I've had so many young women be like, oh, yeah, I didn't think that they could become women either, but kind of in an undertone because they're scared to say it. And so I think that applies to a lot of people. I just spoke yesterday to a professor named Kathleen Stock, who just wrote this book called Material Girls, Why Reality Matters for Feminism. And she wrote about this idea of immersing yourself in fiction. She wrote about it in the context of transgender, but that we are all capable of immersing ourselves in a fiction. Sometimes we do it together, communally, but it doesn't mean that you've been deceived or that you really believe it. And I think that's happening here. So I think a lot of people, I'm sorry, I didn't answer your question because I just don't know, but I do think a lot of people are questioning it privately, yes.
And do you think that the approach to talking to younger people is different than sort of trying to get institutions to broaden their definition of diversity?
Oh, what do you mean exactly?
I mean, how would you, so we have different challenges. Okay, so corporations are using diversity, equity, inclusion programs that might inculcate people into one perspective on race, coerce them into saying things that they don't believe, stifle the discourse at the company. That's one challenge. Another challenge might be, you work for the New York Times and you say something that the mob disagrees with and you get fired. Another one is, how do you broaden and diversify the conversation among young people? Are they all the same argument? Are they all the same approach? Do young people, are there specific ways that you think we should be approaching young people that we wouldn't, let's say, approach Goldman Sachs or some company that's also doing a course of diversity training program?
Yes, I think I see what you're getting at. I think when we approach young people, or really anyone on an individual basis, they want to do good. And so they want to feel like other people perceive them as good. That's also part of it. But when you're looking, so we have to talk to them on a human level and see what it is they really want and how we can really achieve that. But when you're talking about an institution like Goldman Sachs, they just want profit. So this is all good for their profits because no one's going to be looking at what they're doing, how they're stealing money from the American people, or how they're being subsidized by the government. But this completely works in their favor. Like, it's just the people squabbling amongst themselves, whether are you Black, are you white, are you trans, are you cis, and there is no attention being directed to the top. So when we approach I don't know how we approach the institutions, but I think we need to keep that in mind. They have no interest in achieving equality or diversity or justice or any of those things. They just want to keep their business model running smoothly. They don't care if a few faces change at the top. That's why I think I'm very suspicious of the concept of equity, because to me, equity looks like you just want to have diverse faces in high places, rather than actually raising up the bottom of workers who have terrible conditions. So yeah, that was, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it is. It's yeah, and it's an interesting. Yeah, the equity issue is one of those sort of creeping concepts too in our discourse that people think sounds a lot like equality, and they think that they ought to support it, and they don't realize that it can actually be quite radical in nature. I had heard a story about Colorado College recently, in which they canceled some of the spiritual life programs because Jews and Catholics students were getting more support from the outside than other religious traditions. And in the name of equity, sort of the Kendi variety of equity, they needed everybody to receive the same. So they just decided to cancel it altogether, so no one would have better spiritual life programs than anybody else. And I thought, wow, okay, is that the direction that we're taking in equity? And I worry about that. And I worry that, by the way, it doesn't really deal with the major challenge, which is that we have to invest in certain communities to make sure that there's a pipeline of people who are qualified for this job. You're not going to be able to fake it if there's not enough African Americans who are in the pipeline to be scientists. You're not going to be able to just hire them into a field where they're underrepresented. You need to actually invest in the young people so that they'll become scientists. Invest in STEM. Make sure that that there's enough people in the pipeline before you can do that. And it seems to me that that this discourse really doesn't help us solve social problems.
I completely agree. I think, and I could use something from feminism, like a lot of mainstream pop feminism is concerned with the glass ceiling. They want to shatter the glass ceiling. Well, working class women don't really focus on or care about the glass ceiling. They want to raise the dirt floor, to use, a metaphor. I mean, they want their basic needs met. And to have Hillary Clinton, I mean, yes, it is. We have never had a female president. That's something you could talk about. That's a sign of something for sure. But it doesn't actually matter to women in this country on the ground level. It really doesn't. So I think, and we had a policy in Oakland, I'm not going to be very specific because I don't remember, but there was a policy where they were giving poor families some money, some, funds during COVID, but they were giving poor Black families. So it was by race. And that is just going to foment resentment and tension. I mean, that's going to increase racism. So right. I think we need to lift up working class people, and then people will be free to choose what professions they want to go into, what they want to do. They can naturally gravitate towards the careers that they want. They won't be excluded from them, but they won't be, like you said, artificially put in there just for the sake of diversity.
Yeah. The other thing that strikes me about it is that it actually can target the wrong people, because what you're doing is you're conflating a class issue with a race issue. So, for example, if you look at health disparities among Blacks and other ethnic communities, it will show that Black people have more health problems than white people. But if you control for class, you realize it's actually a class issue. So if you start to do more vaccines or more medical interventions based on race alone, you'll give a lot of Black people in the middle class, upper middle class vaccines, and you'll under support whites and other ethnic communities that are poorer. And I think that's part of the discourse. Is if you racialize everything, you actually miss the root problem. And in a lot of cases, it's not race, it's around class.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think people who have never experienced poverty in any form, maybe they just completely don't get that. They just don't see it. They just think things should be done by race because we have historical real grievances and oppression by race and ongoing discrimination, of course. But it's just, in no world should we be doing things like that by race, because it just makes it worse, and it doesn't help. Like you said, the people who need it on average, I mean, it should be completely done by class, not by race.
Sasha, I really appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to getting to know Plebity better. I had a chance to talk to your father as well, and we're looking forward to finding ways of collaborating with Plebity to help make our society more committed to the liberal values that are so important to who we are and how we can possibly become a better society. So thank you so much. And I'm going to certainly keep tabs on you, because I'm sure you have, you're going to be one of the leading lights in this struggle and moving forward.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate it.